Hi, everyone. We'll give people just a couple more minutes here to join us. So for today's webinar, we'll be utilizing the chat function for any questions or any interaction that we have. Megan has a couple of questions for people or polls. Um, you're all going to be muted. Feel free to turn your camera on so we can see your faces. Um, but yeah, we're going to be utilizing the chat function for any discussions. Okay, I think we will get started here. We have a lot of people joining us today. This is awesome. Yeah, so let's get started. My name is Caitlin Healy. I am the HR coordinator and marketing specialist here at Wisconsin Family Ties. If this is your first Empowered Families webinar, welcome. We put these webinars on monthly. Megan, who's joining us today, is graciously providing 2 webinars for us this month. This one is going to center more on clinicians and the work that people in mental health systems of care do with parents and caregivers. The one next week that she's doing will be at 6 p.m. and that one will be more geared towards parents and caregivers, particularly foster parents. So we're really excited to have her today. Yeah, thank you all so much for being here. Before I hand it over, I'll just do a quick introduction for Megan. She is a licensed professional counselor, a registered play therapist, and an author of a book that I think she's going to talk about a little bit more here. And she is the founder of Time for a Change Counseling Services. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Megan Ham.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Well, it's afternoon for me. So, as Caitlin said, I am Megan Ham, and I want us to just get started by thinking about, and it's interactive, and you can use your chat. So, and I have my chat open. This technology, I'm getting used to it. So just whatever question you have, drop it in the chat, and I'll answer the questions as we go along. But I'll also leave time at the end for question and answer. And so I want you to think about when you looked at the topic from conflict to collaboration, making parents true partners in treatment, what are some of the things that you were looking for to get from having this time that we spend together today? So everybody just take a few seconds to think about what is it that you want to get from this conversation today so that we can make sure that we're all in the right place and we're all getting the things that we need. And you can feel free to drop it in the chat. Okay, so we have how to collaborate with social services and libraries, conflict resolution. Okay, those are some very good topics, and we will definitely cover some of that. If I don't, make sure you have a question at the end. So that we can get and we're gonna get started. So who is this for? So when I thought about this, the work that we're doing, I thought about the person who, and maybe we're there, or maybe we've been there before, but we absolutely love working with kids. I mean, we can work with kids all day. We can talk to kids, we can do all the things. But when it comes to working with that mama, or trying to help that grandmama understand, or trying to get that aunt to get on the same page with us, it just sometimes feel like, you know what? I just don't even want to work with kids because it's so hard to get the adult involved. And so this is for the helping professional who loves to work with children, and children, even the ones who show with challenging behaviors, or the one I want to help the parents, but the conversations always go sideways. They always feel so emotional. Somebody leaves upset every time I try to talk to mom or grandma about this one thing. But then sometimes you leave the sessions replaying in your head, like, what did I say? Or I wish I would have said. Or when mom made this comment, I wish I would have been able to say something different or being able to redirect her. But also, you want to learn how to collaborate with families and not just feel like they have to comply or there's compliance involved. Because let's be honest, sometimes in the work that we do, especially when we're working with children, sometimes in that work, there are some compliance things that have to be done. And for parents, sometimes it's like, hey, I wish I could spend more time with you helping you process through this. But the reality is, we got to get this thing done because it's for the child's safety. And so I want you to think about one word that describes how parent sessions usually feel for you. If you are somebody who works with children, loves working with kids, but how does that feel when those parent sessions show up? For me, I used to be so anxious. And when I first started working with kids, I was younger and I wasn't a parent myself. And one of the things that I always would get that people would always say is, well, how can you help me and you don't even have kids? And so, even going into a session with a parent that I meet for the first time, that anxiety just took over every time. And so, I found myself always over explaining and trying to prove to them that I knew what I was talking about. And it probably just sounded like, Charlie Brown's teacher to the parent because I was overwhelmed. And so, that's what we're going to talk about today. So why are these conversations so hard? The conversations are hard because we sometimes, as the helping professional, we feel unsure about what to say and how to respond. And parents already arrive dysregulated, right? So we talk a lot about kids being dysregulated and working with kids who have these big behaviors or challenging behaviors. But what happens when the parents are dysregulated? But also, they're repeatedly having these conversations with people that are telling them what they're doing wrong or what they need to do more of or what they need to do better. And so they enter the conversation already feeling shame, already feeling defeated. Just imagine if you were getting a call from the school or a professional for the third time this month about your child and their behaviors. How would that make you feel? How would you show up to those meetings as well? The other thing is, we're helping professionals and they've given us that title. No matter if you're a clinician, if you're a social worker, if you're a family worker, you're a helping professional. And so we take on that role of wanting to be a helper and we want to fix things and we want to explain to them because we've been trained that if I if somebody understands the reason why, it's going to make them do the thing. And that's not always true. We can explain to a parent why it's important to do that, but it's not going to make them change or do something different because they know the why. And also, we feel like we need to convince them because somewhere along the way, as a helping professional, we have attached our worthiness or our effectiveness on somebody else's behavior and what they do. And so for us, if I am the person who is called into the school to help this child, and this child does not get help, or this child doesn't do the thing they're supposed to do, then guess what? Then maybe I'm not a good therapist, or maybe I'm not a good clinician. And what happens is the other part that we don't always talk about is we have two nervous systems meeting under stress. As a new clinician, I was anxious and stressed. As a parent who has this child that just keeps getting called, she keeps getting called to the office or she keeps getting called, she's under stress. And then we have this child who's having these behaviors who's under stress. And so everybody's stressed out and we're supposed to be the one to fix it all, but nobody wants to change, right? And so those are some of the things that we come into the conversation with, and that's why the conversations can feel so hard. But I want to let you know, as a clinician, as a helping professional, as a case manager, as a child advocate, we've been holding the space even when we're exhausted for all of the families that we work with, because nobody told us that it's okay for us to be able to go into these situations and have these conversations from a different place without leaving saying, you need to make sure mom signs this safety plan, or you need to make sure that mom understands that her yelling is what's causing the behavior, or you need to have mom to understand that when the school calls, she has to answer. Because those are some of the conversations that they're calling us for. I know that's what they're calling me for. And so that's where we're showing up. But what happens if what is the cost of us staying in conflict? What is the cost of us staying in those systems or feeling that way when we're going in to talk to the parents? One is strained alliances. But what does that mean? That means that when we call, the mama tired of us calling, and honestly, we tired of calling her. Because every time we call, it's the same thing. And we get this resistance. And we get this, I don't want to change, or you don't know what you're talking about. And so a lot of times it's like, do I have to see them this week? I don't know about y'all. Now, y'all may not admit it, but I definitely have been there before, a time or two. But also, parents disengage or push back. And so everything that you say to the parent is they don't feel like it is something that they can learn from or know, because they're like, okay, she just doesn't understand, right? Or it's easy for me to come in and say, hey, you should be consistent. And every time he does this thing, you should do this thing. It's easy to come in and say that and then leave, because we're not the ones dealing with it every day. But also, inconsistent follow through is what happens. And then clinicians start to feel ineffective or burnt out. Of course, going back to us feeling like, if I've been working with this family for 3, 6 months and the behavior is getting worse, then I'm going to feel like, why am I continuing to go to this home? And the parents are going to feel like, why do I keep letting you in my door? Or why do I keep coming to this office and nothing's changing? And sometimes parents will say it's actually getting worse. So thinking about that, how conversations are getting hard, what is the cost of staying in conflict? I want you to take a few moments, and I want you to answer the question, how confident do you feel navigating hard parent conversations right now? If you feel like you are, and let's say we're going to have A is somebody that, oh, I'm extremely confident, no issues, I got this. B is, hey, I think sometimes I can do, it's all right, but then sometimes I really don't know. Depends on the family. And then C is, I'm really not sure. How do y'all feel about your level of confidence when having these hard parent conversations? A, very confident. B, sometimes depending on the family. Or C, I would rather do something else with my time. Okay, we got some B's, some C's. Okay, we got some A's. I see those A's, right? And so thank y'all for that, because what I want us to do is I want us to be able to leave this space feeling a little more confident, a little more with a little more clarity, to be able to have the conversations with the parents. And so, who am I? So, I am Megan Ham. I'm a licensed professional counselor. I am a registered play therapist. I'm a trauma and attachment trained professional. But I have on here, I'm a previous foster parent. But when I'm talking to people, they're like, because I talk to a lot of foster and adoptive parents. And when I put former foster parent, people are like, well, does that mean that it got too hard and you quit? And so I need to change that, because I'm actually a foster to adoptive parent. And I feel like compassion is an action word. And I say that, I feel like that is important to say, because the experience that I have, it comes from a place of clinical experience, but also it comes from a place of lived experience. And I tell people all the time, me becoming a foster parent and then adopting my girls was the thing that it changed the way that I worked with children who have been a part of a system, or children who have lived with trauma. I'm gonna be honest. When I first started in the field, and I put nearly 2 decades ago, because I gave somebody my bio, and they put nearly 2 decades. I'm like, oh, that sounds so much more regal. So now I'm gonna start telling people nearly 2 decades. But so I put that in there because I have been working for nearly 2 decades. I have been working with families who've been in crisis. And I call it crisis because if you've ever been in a meltdown cycle, or a family who's having meltdown after meltdown after meltdown, or all these behavior issues, they're in crisis. And so I've always worked with those type of families, all the work that I've done. But it wasn't until I became a foster parent to a wonderful young lady who has suffered and dealt with so much, that it really changed the way that I show up in the world. It changed the way that I see the behavior, and it changed the way that I do the work. Because my story is really, I hate to say, is no different than most stories of foster parents that I hear. Because at the times where I was having behaviors, the conversation that I was getting was, oh, but you do this for a living, so you're okay. oh, and you do this, so you're okay. And so even some of the behavior struggles that we were having, yes, I was able to approach them from a different perspective because I was trauma trained and I was working with children already, and I was doing the things. I was already a licensed professional counselor, but to be able to do it in my home at that level, it was a different experience. And so I stand here with you today because without that experience and me recognizing that if I was having these struggles and I'm trauma trained, teaching parents, doing all the things, what are the struggles that the everyday foster parent are truly having? And so that's where the book came in and all of the things, because the book became, and I know it's very cliche to say, because the book became what I needed. But the reality of it is all of the books that I was reading and all of the research that I was doing, there was no book that was telling me that was taking me on my journey of what parenting was for me so that I can understand how to parent her. And so that's how we get here today. Honestly, me going into the role of being a foster parent and then really changing the way that I see or that I deal with or that I work with children who've been impacted by trauma and the conversations that we're having with the foster parents, right? Because it's one thing to understand that traumatic responses will show up in different ways, but having somebody walk alongside you and say, "But that's not the end of it," right? But that doesn't have to be where it is, and it doesn't have to stay there. And so that's why we're here today. And so as we continue, one of the things I realize is that as I've been working with foster and adoptive parent children and their parents, is a friend of mine told me, well, Megan, it's easy for you because you like working with parents. I'm like, I wouldn't say I like working with parents, but she was like, most people, including me, I don't work with kids because I don't want to work with parents. And she was like, but you make it seem so easy. And that's what I thought about. Maybe there is a conversation that needs to be had on how to work with parents, how to have those conversations. One of the things is realizing that behavior isn't the problem. Behavior is information, right? Because behavior communicates an unmet need. And that's one thing that my relationship with my daughter taught me, is that in those moments, behavior, it's about what is she needing versus, oh, she just wants to, let's be honest. Sometimes like, oh, you just trying me. You just want to get on my nerves. You just don't want to listen. You just want your way. All of those things, and us having to really figure it out. And then stress narrows a child capacity. Just like when we're stressed out, we're totally different people. It's the same thing with kids when they're stressed out. But the one thing that I teach parents and also helping professionals, is that the way that we respond becomes their compass. And so either we're going to increase the agitation or we're going to decrease it. Those are the only two options that we have. And sometimes, because I know if y'all have been working with families, sometimes you'll be like, well, mama, if you wouldn't have done dot dot dot, he was okay. Right? I had calmed him down, or we had done the thing, or we had used all of the skills, and he was okay. And then you want to go and remind him of something he did weeks ago. And so it gets right back. Right. And sometimes parents need that clarity. Parents need to be able to understand that behavior is communicating an unmet need. Parents need to be able to understand that environment is very important when it comes to how are we addressing the behaviors. But we have to be able to tell the parent in a way that doesn't make them feel like, well, everything you've been doing is wrong. Right? Because sometimes it can come off that way. Right? Like, oh, well, you shouldn't have did this. And sometimes we just have to understand that the parent is doing the best they can with what they have at the time. And our job is to meet them where they are and bring them to where we feel like they need to be. Right? So I want you to think about, what do parents most often think about their child's behavior, or what do they think the behavior means when you're talking to parents? What are some of the things that they're saying? I know one of the things I get all the time is, oh, he just don't like the word no, right? Or he just don't like, he likes to have his way. Or parents would say, I hear that a lot. He's just ungrateful, right? They didn't get what they wanted. They don't respect me. Yep, those are some of the things. And not only as parents, but also having these conversations with our stakeholders, like the teachers and the principals and things like that. Oh, he's been a drama king all the time, all of the above, right? And so these are some of the conversations that parents are having, because for them, they don't see the behavior as an unmet need. They see the behavior as something external without really figuring out what's going on underneath. And sometimes we can be the trigger. We, as in the parents, can be the trigger, because we have to be able to figure that out and navigate that as well. Yeah, or he's just always been like that. Or another one that I get that is, oh, that's just how his daddy is, right? Or that's how his daddy side of the family is. And so it takes away our power to do anything different if we feel like that's just kind of how they are and how they're going to always be, right? Tired, scared, frightened. Yeah, of course. I can definitely understand being tired and then having somebody come and say, "Oh, well, you need to try this." Because let's be honest, sometimes by the time they get to us, as in a mental health professional or a clinician or a service provider, they've already been through a lot and they've already tried a lot. So it's not like sometimes we're the first response. And so by the time they get to us and we're saying like, "Oh, take his game," or do time out, they got back. The kid does, it becomes a reflection of you and your parenting. Right. Let's be, every time, I know for me, I have to work myself. I'm working on that. But if something happens in a child, something happens with the child, the first thing they say is who the mama? Or how is, you see it online all the time, how's the mama raising them? What are the parents doing? What are the parents not doing? Yeah, they say it's frozen. Is it frozen for everybody?
I think it's back up now. I think it was
Oh,
frozen for just a little bit. Sorry about
oh,
that,
I apologize.
everybody.
Yeah, and I'm in Mississippi, so if y'all know y'all legislate. I make a running joke. I tell people, if you will you write your senators and tell them that we need better internet in Mississippi, please and thank you. So yeah, so thinking about those things, what the parents are carrying, because we put a lot of responsibility on the parent, right? And there's so much conversation on social media about parenting this and parenting that and what the parent should have done and all those things. But that's what the parent is carrying, especially, I'm gonna say, especially in the South. I don't know if anybody on here is from the South, but in the South, it becomes who your mama them. Like that becomes a thing. When you do something, it's not about you making an individual decision. It's about, oh no, your mama shoulda, right? Or your mama shoulda, all the things they say that parents should have done. But also, parents are exhausted from repeated calls. Like, how would you feel if somebody was calling you? You're doing the best that you can. You're doing all the things that they're telling you to do. You're trying to put consequences in place. You're trying to put the child on punishment, and then every other day, the school is calling you, telling you, "Hey, he's had another episode," or "Hey, you have to come pick her up," or "Hey, this thing has to happen." And then also feeling shame from past interactions. Think about how shameful that would be if you're in Walmart and your child is having a tantrum and you are the person that gave birth, or you're the person that's caring for this child and you can't calm them down, right? You can't calm them down. And so that makes us feel shame, but also the desire for quick relief. I just want this to be over with. Right. So I'm bringing you into my home. And I say home based services because I started in home based services. Um, but I'm bringing you into my home. I'm allowing you to come here. And then, what do you mean it's going to take 6 to 8 months? What do you mean you can't fix this right now? right? And I tell parents all the time, the thing is, we don't have, I tell parents all the time, come bring your child to therapy is not like the dry cleaner. You can't drop them off. I fix them, steam them, and send them on back out there clean. That's not how it works. But sometimes people feel like that's what it is. I bring my kids in, and then there's supposed to be a change that's supposed to happen. So I want you to take all this into consideration, just about what the parent is carrying into their session. What are the things that they're dealing with already before we even walk in the door? And so I want you to meet Jalen. So Jalen is an 8-year-old, and he was referred for services for aggressive behaviors at school, right? And aggressive behaviors at home and at school. He's very bright, has good grades, can talk really well, successful academically, most of A's and B's. And so, which leads to most adults in his life feeling like he should just know better, right? You're too smart to act like that, Jalen. Like, what are you doing? His teachers describe him as he's quick to argue, he's explosive, highly reactive when corrected. Like, the thing is, like they say, he always wants his way. If you tell him no or he can't do something, Jalen just kind of goes off, right? I want you to think about in the chat, when you think about Jalen and the things that you see about him, just from that, what labels do children like Jalen often get in school or when they come into our office? How do we usually label Jalen? What do we think? How do we label him? Okay, ODD, diagnosing him for like different things like ODD, at risk, a troublemaker, a difficult. Yep. Bad. We do. Right? Challenging. Somebody that just needs a spanking, right? And so those are the labels that we put on the kids' attention. So Jalen lives with his grandmother, right? Who is his primary caregiver, not by her choice. Because most grandparents are not primary caregivers by their choice. But by the time he is referred for services, we all had our Jalen's. She's already tried everything. She's tired of her phone ringing. She just, every time it's always something. The teacher's always calling. Somebody's always calling because Jalen did something wrong. And over time, so when she gets to the school, she already mad. She's guarded. She's defensive. She just waiting for somebody to blame her or tell her what she needs to do different. And she's having conversations that really tired of having conversations that are beyond her control. Like, well, I wish mom could do this, or I wish mom would do that, or I wish these things could happen. And grandma has no control over that. And from her perspective, she's tried everything that she knows. She's raising Jalen the way that she raised her kids, right? With some traditional discipline, clear consequences, boundaries, all the things, but nothing seems to work. So I want you to ask yourself, if you were this grandmother, what might you be feeling walking into a session with some professionals? What might be, or even at the school or even a mental health session, what might you be feeling if you were this grandmother? Frustration, already feeling discouraged, judged. Another part that we don't talk about, exhausted. Another part that we don't talk about is the shame and judgment that sometimes feel because people will assume because I didn't raise my child well, now I'm having to raise my grandkids, right? And so that conversation is a conversation that we quietly have sometimes, but it's part of their story. And so feeling alone, feeling guarded, disappointed, resentment, of course, all of those things. And so here's where we sometimes get stuck as the helping professional. We will focus on Jalen's behavior. How we're going to reduce it, how we're going to manage it, how we're going to stop it, how we're going to slow it down, and all those things. And sometimes we don't take the time to try to figure out what is that behavior communicating and what is the caregiver carrying. Like, what are the things that the caregiver is dealing with that we need to be able to help them with? So in working with Jalen and his grandmother, the grandmother will share things like, well, he doesn't act like that with his uncle. And sometimes we think it's because his uncle doesn't play or like he's afraid. And sometimes just that idea that a man's presence will make a young man, act better, as they say. But what really happened once we started working with Jalen and his grandmother, what we realized is that when the uncle came to visit, the uncle would take him outside and do things with him, but the uncle never talked about his behavior, I'm gonna say his bad behavior. He never talked about, oh, I heard you got in trouble at school today. What happened? He didn't talk about that. He would always just focus on the things that Jalen was doing well. He would say, hey, you got your report card. I heard you got good grades. Or he would focus on, oh, I heard you wanted to play baseball, and in order for you to play baseball, these are things you're gonna have to do. So those were the things. But once we had that conversation with grandma, understanding changed the way that we work with Jalen. So what would you notice about the adult behavior in this situation? What's different from the way grandma is doing things versus the way that the uncle is handling it? What would you say if you were working with Jalen in the family? Focusing on the positive. And sometimes, because the thing that we have to get away from is there are things that happen that we have absolutely no control over, right? Things like the fact that the uncle is a man, and sometimes people will get stuck on it. Well, I can't do anything. He's just doing that because he's only doing that with him because he's a man. But we can't get stuck on that because then it takes away our power. So once we started working with Jalen, his grandma, we were no longer trying to fix Jalen's behavior, right? We were looking at the adult responses, helping grandmother understand that his behavior was a response to something, and that it wasn't just about knowing what it was a response to, but how can she show up and how can she help him? Because once we start seeing Jalen as a child who was in crisis, right? As a child who was dealing with the crisis, with his nervous system all out of whack and just having these explosive behaviors, we were more open. The grandma was more open. The teachers were more open. Everybody was more open to trying to figure out how can I help this child in crisis versus trying to say, oh, he just wants to have his way. And so the insight that comes from this is being able to support the grandmother differently. Instead of giving her different strategies and, well, you need to take his phone, or you need to take his computer, or you don't need to let him play a sport, or until he learns how to act and all these things, we helped her recognize how her stress shows up in the conversations. Because even when Jalen hadn't done anything, because she's already on a 10, because the school to call her 3 days on a row, so she starts to respond to Jalen in that way. Right. And we've all heard of the situations like that. And honestly, I'm honest enough to say, as a parent, I've had to deal with that myself. I've had to be honest and say, okay, Megan, is this something that the kids have really done, or is this because you had a really stressful day today? Right? Because sometimes kids can do things one day and it's fine. They can do that same thing the next day and it's not fine because of where we are and where our stress level may be. And so we were able to have a conversation with grandma about not necessarily her responses were right or wrong, but she was responding because she was overwhelmed and because she was stressed. And she had a lot going on. And you were raising a kid who it wasn't your time to raise kids anymore, right? And so all of those things had to come into play as we were working with this family. So how often, as providers, how often do we ask caregivers to change their behavior without helping them feel safe? And safe is the same thing with kids, not just the safety, like physical safety, but the emotional safety to try. How often do we do that? I want you to just think about that. Because one thing I do in my space when I'm working with parents, and I tell parents this all the time, like I keep a list, a notebook of things that I'm grateful for. If I'm being honest, parenting, my role as a mom is one of the things that I'm grateful for every day, but it's also one of the most stressful challenges I've ever had in my life. And I'm just at 12 and 13. So please send me some good vibes when these girls become teenagers and older than that, right? And so understanding that though, I create a safe space where a parent can say, you know what, my child, they get on my nerves sometimes. without me feeling like I need to call DHS because they're being neglectful or because they're emotionally abusing their kids, or calling somebody and saying, hey, she don't really love her kids. It's okay for a parent to be able to say, you know what, I absolutely love my kid. But it is hard when I know I'm doing all the things that I told you I was gonna do, and I'm trying to raise you in a way that's different than how I was raised, and we're still dealing with the conflict. Because now we're in a season where some parents they realize that those traditional ways of raising kids, traditional discipline, doesn't work on these new kids, right? And it's not about gentle parenting and all that, but even just letting children have a voice is different than how some of us were raised. And we're doing this and we're trying to do all these things, and the kid is still acting out. So you're like, let me just go back to doing what my grandma would have done, right? And then we'll just be done with this. And so what happens is once we start to shift the conversation, so does the grandmother, so does the parent that we're working with. They stop defending their behavior and start wondering, what might it look like if I did something different? What might it look like if I didn't let the way that our connection and relationship doesn't have to be attached to their correction or them getting in trouble at school? Especially when, and I don't know if for y'all, but sometimes that old school traditional discipline is, oh, you got in trouble at school today, so you're not even having a birthday party this year, right? Or if a child is having a hard time at school, then the parents will be like, well, you can't play sports at all. And sometimes those things can be difficult to navigate, but also using as a punishment, like as a give and take situation that kind of breaks down in the middle sometimes. And so what happens is we start to regulate grandmama and we start to regulate Jalen, so that everybody feels supported. And so then we can shift from the conflict that we're having in the house to real collaboration and how can we help. And that's where change begins. So a lot of times the conversations will go sideways when we're moving too fast. We're explaining before we're explaining to the parent everything they need to do before we're trying to connect to them, right? And we're talking at the parents instead of with them, and we're missing things that they have going on, right? And a lot of times, that is happening in the families that we work with. In general, do the parents use the word feel there? Yep. And so, like somebody said, making sure the parents feel like they're part of the team. Because a lot of times we'll say, we have this cliche thing we say, that, oh, the parent is you're the professional, but the parent is the what's the word? They're the expert on their child, right? And we'll say that to make the parent feel like they're included, but then we're not really, we don't really include them in that way. And I think them being an expert on their child is like, your child, but part of the work that we need to do is to be able to help you understand what that means. Because our expertise is understanding that the behavior didn't just come from anywhere, right? That there's something underneath that behavior. That's where our expertise comes in, but also helping the parents help you understand that, and helping them see where their expertise is, because sometimes it can be as simple as them understanding that, what are some of those triggers, and they don't even know, like, use word triggers, but what are the things that happen before we start to have these outbursts or before these things start to happen. Because people love to say, oh, they go from 0 to 100 really fast, and that's true, but 1 through 99 are still in between, and we have to figure out the 1 through 99 to be able to support them. And so conversations going sideways, right? We talked about that. Moving too fast into fixing, explaining before connecting, talking at the parents instead of with them, and missing what the parent brings into the session. And so I'm going to talk about a few things that I use, some techniques that I use when I'm working with families, especially with the parent, on how to bring them in. Part of the work that I do when I'm working with children is I have to work with the parent. So when the parent brings a child in for therapy, if I'm working with the child, and it really depends on what the needs are, but I see all of my parents at least once a month. Like, if I see the child weekly, I'll see the child 3 times, the parent 1 time. And so in that, if the parent misses their meeting, right, then we don't have another child meeting. Like, the parent has to come to their meeting. I've had some parents like, oh yeah, I'm gonna just send Johnny on over there. But the way that I work with the parent is, if the parent doesn't come, if the parent is not willing to be an active participant in treatment, then that's not a case that I could do. And I do understand, for me, I have the privilege of doing that because I am in private practice. And everybody doesn't have the privilege to do that. And I think it's about being able to document it and being able to have conversations with the parents. Because um, what I do with parents is when I'm talking to them, probably the first few, I don't know, like the first third of the session is really about them and where they are and what they need before we even get into the behaviors of the kid and all those things. And all my parents know, when you come into a session, the first thing you always have, what did you do for yourself? I don't care what them kids had going on. I don't care how many meets you had to go to, how many practices, how many games. The question is, what did you do for yourself? Right? Because that is part of the structure that we have to help parents understand and realize. Right. So the first thing for us is we have to ground ourselves before we guide. Like I told you, when I first started, I would go into these sessions, I would be so anxious because they would ask me the questions of like, well, how can you tell me how to help my child and you don't even have children? But I realized for me, that came from a place of feeling a bit, of course, being younger in the field, but also feeling like I had to prove myself. And so I would go in there and I would try to, of course, not have an attitude, but sometimes I want to like just rattle off all of my, all of my degrees and all of my certifications, but that's not going to help anybody feel like they can trust me, right? So being able to make sure that I'm going into the situation regulated, because we always encourage our parents, hey, when your child's having a challenging moment or a meltdown, you have to be regulated. It's the same thing when we're working with the parents. We have to be regulated, even if the caregiver is dysregulated. Even if the caregiver is going off, we have to be able to find a way for us to regulate. Because what happens is us being able to slow down for a moment, because we can't guide a parent if we're not regulated, right? And we understand that we have to be able to connect with them in another way. So regulating ourselves, slowing our breathing down, noticing what's coming up for us. And that's something that we can definitely work on with our supervisors or whoever we use for if we have a clinical team, a consultation team. Like, be honest. And I'm hopeful that everybody has a safe space where they can say, you know what, I love working with Johnny, but baby, his mama get on my nerves sometimes. And being able to have that, and I talk like that. I talk about people being on my nerves, right? But I have that so that we can have that conversation without judging and without it showing up on your clinical evaluation, doesn't know how to work with parents, because that's hard. That's tough. So being able to have the space where you can work through that. What does that feel like? What does that look like? What is that for me? What's really showing up? And I can tell you, for me, it was the fact that I was young. It was also the fact that I didn't have any children, and the fact that I was raised by, in my family, there were a lot of women. And because I didn't have kids, they would minimize, like if my cousins or something would call and be like, well, what you calling Megan for? She ain't got no kids. And so I took that into my work. Does that make sense? But I had to work through that. And it had nothing to do with all of the, child development stuff that we had learned. It was just people saying I didn't have that experience, right? And so that's one. The second thing is reframing the behavior as communication, helping them understand that this behavior that you're seeing is something. It's something else. It's not just that Johnny don't want to go to bed. I promise you. It's not just that Johnny doesn't like to hear the word no. Because, can I be honest? I don't like hearing the word no either. I hate it. Like, I hate when somebody tells me no. And I think a lot of time as an adult, I'm like, you know what? I'll just go do it myself. I don't need somebody's permission. But children don't have that. So when we shift the conversation with the parents from what's wrong to what is this behavior signaling for me? What is coming up? And separate the intent from the stress response, right? Because we've talked about, I've said the word stress a lot, but when I'm using the word stress, I'm really talking about like the way our nervous system is responding. That typical fight, flight, fright, right? No, fight, flight, freeze. When I say it too fast, I don't know what I'm saying. All right. So no, the typical stress response, right? So separating what that from those responses to what the intent of that behavior is. Because sometimes if we feel like, I'm being honest with you, If I feel like my kid's just trying to get on my nerves, ain't nothing they can say that's gonna help me think anything different. But I have to take that off when I go into the room as a parent, and I have to take that off when I go into the room teaching parents how to look at it from a different perspective. And also, one of the things that's helped me is helping parents understand that this could be a trauma response, that this could be just the brain's way of trying to make sense of the world, and the behavior is not intentional to you. They're not trying to hurt you. They're not trying to make your day worse. They're not trying to do those things, but this is what the behavior is showing up as. And while that works, because it helps reframe it reduces the blame. And so the parent's not saying, oh, well, I'm blaming myself for this child's behavior. Oh, this is what's going on. And it helps you make sense of, okay, it makes you more curious if this behavior is their way of showing that they're internally in distress or they're internally in crisis, then how can I help it? How can I? It's easier for me if my child is going off. If I feel like they're just trying to get on my nerves, I'm going to show it one way. But if I feel like my baby really is struggling with something right now, it's going to make me approach them in a different way. And that's what we want the parents to be able to do, but us as well. Because when children feel overwhelmed, their behavior is going to tell us before their words. And when we're reframing the behavior, we take the shame away from the parent about what they should be doing or what could be going on. So those are things, when you think about reframing the behavior, that's the important part of why we should do that. But also making sure that we're affirming the parent and the caregiver. Validate their effort and what they're doing. Like, hey, I can only imagine how hard this could be for you. Right? Name what they're stressed out about. Normalize their frustrations. That's why parents can come in here and say, you know what? And I have parents that tell me all the time, Miss Megan, your boy done got on my nerves this week. And I know exactly what they're meaning without saying, oh, she doesn't want to raise her son, or all of the negative things that sometimes will show up. And so being able to affirm them, because that shame, taking away that shame and adding that curiosity, right? And then it lowers their defensiveness and they can feel more seen. Because a parent can feel comfortable knowing that they're going to come in here and tell me how their week went, what it was that the kid did, how the kid made them feel, without me being like, well, you should be more, responsible than that. Or you shouldn't let stuff like that bother you. Like, hey, that was tough. I can only imagine what that was like. But also, validation, the same thing with parents and kids, because I have to have this conversation with people. Understanding why behavior is there and validating that the behavior is there does not mean that I think that is right or wrong. Okay. So validation is not agreement. That doesn't mean that I'm saying, oh, the way you handled that was, oh, you did good. I just slapped them too. Like, that's not the conversations we're having in these sessions. But being able to say, hey, it was tough for you in that moment. That was the response that you had. What can we do? What's the next step? What do you need? What did you need in that moment? And that helps parents be able to say what they need as well as what their child needs. But then one step at a time. How many of us go into session and I told y'all I started with community mental health. So one of the first things we had to do when we work with families is the second time we met somebody, after the first time they tell us their whole life story and every bad thing that Jonathan ever done since he was 3 months old and he started crawling and he pulled the sheets off the bed. Like, we know all of that. Then the second time we go meet with them, we need them to fill out a safety plan. And I need to give them at least 6 interventions they can do. I think it was 5 to 6 interventions that they can do that's going to help decrease the behavior. These people don't know me and these people don't trust me. Right. And so those are the things that we come up against. And so what I do now is I slow it down and we just do one small thing at a time. And sometimes mine could be when I'm working with a parent, and it might be where, the child had an explosive moment, so then the mom exploded. And so it just kept going on and on. And so her one thing may be, hey, next time that he starts to yell, you say this, and we create a script. You say this, and then you walk away. And that's all I want you to do. I don't want you to we don't come up with no consequences. We ain't coming up with no discipline techniques. This is the thing I want you to do. This is the thing I want you to practice. Because what it does is once they start seeing success with those small things, then it's easier to go in and say, hey, what else can we add to this? Or what needs to be added? And a lot of times my parents will come in and ask stuff. They'll be like, oh yeah, well this works, so this is what I'm going to do next time. So something small and doable. Because I want you to think about this. We're already talking to parents who are already filled. They already at capacity. They're stressed out at home, they're stressed out at work, and then this kid got these people at the school keep calling them. And so those are things they're already dealing with. So if we get them an entire complete safety plan to do, then they're not gonna, that's where we see the lack of follow through with them not really being able to do it. But also, the last thing I would say is encourage and empower, right? Reinforce their strengths, the things that they did well. I've had parents before, and I say, and I would tell them, because one of the things we try to shift is the physical discipline, right? And so I would tell parents, well, I'm just glad that you didn't whoop them this time. Right. And that may seem like, duh, that's what we're supposed to do. But at the end of the day, that's what they need. That's the encouragement that they need. That you can say, hey, you handled that meltdown and you didn't have to resort to physical punishment, right? Or you handled that meltdown and you didn't have to stand in their bedroom and fuss and argue with them or go back and forth with them for 30, 40 minutes. Those are the things that we do. Those are the ways that we encourage, because it's that strength-based framing that helps them say, okay, these are things that we can do, and I'm doing it. And one of the things I always try to point out when I'm working with families is I always try to pick out something that they're already doing well and they don't realize it. Because sometimes when we have to do things over and over and over, we don't think that we're doing them well. And I think that, on the other hand, I think that's persistence, right? And I think that that is consistency, and we have to continue to help them understand that. And sometimes for us, our role, that's where we are, being able to help them. And so why these interventions work, right? So these interventions work because it centers you and your nervous system first. It reduces the shame. It builds autonomy with the family, them being able to come up with one thing, collaborate one thing at a time. It strengthens the attachment that you and the parent have, and it increases their follow through. So they're able to do all of these things. And sometimes the stuff that they're always doing, and we just have to build upon that. But I encourage you, when you're building upon it, meeting the family where they are means that if they have things that they're doing that works for them, then I would say, how do we take that and we magnify that? Right? As long as it's something that's not hurting them or something that's not a safety issue. But like one thing for me, I have kids that, you know, um families where they're already doing something that's like something that's outside the box. Not necessarily something that I would do as parenting, but it's something that they do and that works. How can we magnify that for them? How can we help them make that better and bigger? Or even sometimes I'll take it and I'll tweak the intervention with the parent. We'll tweak it to make it more trauma informed, where the consequence or the reward that they get is not based upon doing the thing, but based upon their attempt, if that makes sense. And a lot of times that works with families, right? So I want you to take a few minutes. We're gonna open up for question and answer, right? I want you to consider who is your Jalen. Consider the parent or caregiver who you feel that you have a difficult time connecting with, or that you feel that every time you go, it's always something with them. Or for me, I always think about when a parent comes with the issue, especially when we first started working together, and they're like telling me the story, and I'm like, mm-hmm. But if you would have done the thing I asked you to do, we wouldn't be here today. But we have to keep ourselves from telling the parent there, right? Yeah, Jalen is gonna keep doing the thing because you keep doing the thing. So I want you to think about that and consider your Jalen and what are some things that you can do based upon what we talked about today to be able to help that parent and caregiver. And so I do have a feedback form. I would love for you all to fill out the form, the feedback. And when you fill it out, if you choose to give me your email address, I can send you some notes that I have from the presentation. So you just can keep up with it. I know sometimes for me, like I like to write things. And so having the notes from the presentation can be really helpful. And we have time for a question and answer. If anybody have any questions, feel free to ask and we can do that as y'all do the survey.
Feel free to put questions in the chat. I know that a lot of you will probably need certificates or a copy of the slides from today's presentation for continued education. Our requirements, so please feel free to reach out to me if that is something you need. I'll put my email here in the chat. Megan, I know we had some questions earlier. Oh, here's one. How do you work with parents who don't take the child's suicidal ideation seriously?
For especially for something like suicide ideation, I really work, that one is a safety issue. So it's not like we have time to go in here and do all the things. What I do with that parent though is it's for me it's consistency. Consistently every time that we have that conversation, that we have to have the conversation about the safety. And then I try to figure out what is it about that parent? What is it that they're carrying that's making them think that it's not serious? Because sometimes we have parents who think that the suicide ideation is just about, they're looking for attention, they're looking for all of these things. One thing that I also do with those parents is I help them understand like the research behind suicidality. And suicidality, it talks about how the decision is usually made within 30 to 90 seconds, right? So when people are having an idea, they have the ideation that they want to kill themselves, and before they do something, it's usually like 30, well, last time it was 30 to 90 seconds is when they have that window. That's that window. So if we can support them in that 30 to 90 seconds, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, that's the part we need to work on. And I look at it the way that I look at behavior with if we look at the suicidality as a behavior, right? Behavior, what is it communicating when they're saying this thing? What is it that the kid is looking for? Because it's the same thing when we're trying to teach our toddler how to not put something in the socket, right? You wouldn't, if they did it the first time and they kept doing it, you would just be like, okay, I'm not gonna worry about it. You just learn on your own. No, we wouldn't do that. We would keep on because we realize it's a learned behavior. And something in that suicidality, suicide thoughts are making that the goal, that the way that they're coping. And so I would definitely help the parent understand that. About the behavior, what the thing that's going on, how is that behavior showing up? Or what's showing up in that behavior? I hope that answered your question. But I would definitely keep working with them about the importance of that and helping them understand the psychoeducation behind it. Parents who keep their kids home from school. The kid doesn't want to go to school, and so they're keeping them home. And I think for that one, I would definitely look at the behavior. When we think about behavior, I hate to say behavior analysis, but what is that behavior communicating? I would look at what is that anxiety communicating for the child as well as for the parent. Because that parent's behavior is keeping them from school. What is that thing? Is it the fear? Is it I want to keep them from school because I don't want to have to end up going over there to the school to get them? Is it I keep them from school because when I do send them to school, they just call me to come pick them up. And so if that's the fear, the thing that the parent is having, I would address it from that perspective and then help put some supports in place, maybe at the school or other places, so that when the child is having some anxiety at school, the calling the parent to come pick them up is not the only response. Because that may be why the parent isn't sending them. So I would really figure out why the parent isn't sending them to school. Like what's that behavior and what the parent is gaining from that, if that makes sense. Hope that answered that. I'm gonna see what else we got. Collaborate with libraries. With community resources, how would you collaborate with libraries? If you don't, how would you envision supporting these families with community resources? Like supporting them and what resources are available in the community? I guess if somebody, I don't know if they could clarify that or access. But yes, I'm not sure. But I definitely do. And I like to get people outside of their I, part of the work that we do is I realize that sometimes parents don't have a lot of support. And so some of the resources that when I'm working with families that I offer them is like for a parent to go to the library to see what kind of classes they may have. Because if you envision this, I work with parents who are stuck in a meltdown cycle, right? Which means that they have a kid that's acting up all the time. And so I will find, if we're finding like resources in the community, like here we have a community center. We don't have a community center. We have different organizations that do different activities. I would encourage mom, take them to the activity, let them stay in that activity so that then you can get that time to do something where you're not having to be one-on-one mom, and you get kind of like a I'm not gonna say a break, because sometimes you have to be there one-on-one, but being able to find those things that you can do where you don't have to be the only person with the child or dealing with the child. Even if y'all have like some mentorship in the area, reading clubs, a lot of times, I've noticed that children just need other places where they have adults who are not just focused on their behavior. Imagine that the only conversation people have with you is about how bad you are, right? And so children start to live that out in a way. And so I definitely try to get kids in places where that's why I don't believe in taking kids out of sports and activities when their behavior is off, right? Because they need that outlet. And as a parent, I need that outlet, right? So being able to think about that too. I hope that answered your question. Yep, when they're having meltdowns in public and figuring out that behavior, what's that behavior communicating, what's going on? Because it may be they're having a meltdown in public, but like for my daughter is and we could talk all day about some of her meltdowns, but she does with a lot of anxiety, right? And so, meaning before we go somewhere, now she's not diagnosed on the spectrum or autism or anything like that. When we go somewhere, though, she has to know everything that's going on, and so she's gonna ask 1,000. And I'm not over exaggerating. I said 1,000 questions. So if she's going somewhere, she's gonna ask multiple questions over and over and over and over, because for her, she's trying to make sense of it in her head. And honestly, I was at a point, and as a parent, well, I would get irritated, and they'd be like, "I'm just not gonna take you anywhere. Like if I gotta answer all these questions, you're just not gonna go. You'll stay home." But then I realized what was underneath that. She just wanted to know what was going on, the best of her ability, so that it would help soothe her. So now we do social stories and everything because it helps her. It helps her be able to address, okay, what are some things that are going on? What is going to happen? What is this going to look like? Is it going to be a lot of people? Am I going to have to talk to somebody by myself? Like when I tell y'all, she asked all the questions. And so, but I had to figure out what was underneath that behavior of those public meltdowns, because before then it was like, oh, she just can't go nowhere. And people gonna think I just got one kid. They're like, what the other one at? Oh, she at home. Because she don't do right in public. But I had to figure that out for her. Also, as librarians, being able to do it. Yeah, because I imagine like even librarians dealing with children and their behavior at the library. So I think it's the same thing, being able for parents to just kind of lean into what they're doing and figuring out at your library what kind of space can you offer, if like if a parent is having a meltdown with a child, or a child is having a meltdown, they're having a thing, how do you have the space where somebody could help support them, maybe move them to a different area. But the biggest thing I always like is for not to make them leave. Like once the child has had the meltdown, if they're comfortable to go back. Because what happens is, the reality is meltdown, I call them meltdown moments because they only happen for a moment. But if we're being honest, we'll do you you didn't cut up for 35 seconds, or you didn't cut up for 3 minutes, and the whole day is ruined. But that's only 3 minutes out of 24 hours. But sometimes we're so exhausted, like, no, you can't do nothing the rest of the day. So I think definitely being able to have that conversation with them, so that having that space for the parent, and then having them to be able to come back if they can. Any more questions? And I forgot to put my contact information on here, but Caitlin can give it to y'all. Y'all welcome
Hmm.
to have my email address. If you have a question or anything, email me. Contact information, my contact information. So thank y'all so much. This was fun.
Yeah, thank you all so much. This was wonderful. Please, continue to email me. And like Megan said, I can get her contact information and any resources that people need to you guys. I can forward any remaining questions that you have to her. And, there's a lot of great information and resources on her website as well. Yeah, so thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your week. And thank you for all the work that you do for children and families in our state. And thank you, Megan, so much for spending time with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me or allowing me. Thank you.
We love it. All right. Goodbye, everybody.